Okay, I think I've harped enough on this concept of content versus the formatting or the dress up of that content. And I hope it makes sense. And if you're still having trouble wrapping the old noodle around it, spend some time on CSS Zen Garden or go back and watch the first few videos. Or, you might even want to go back and watch some of the videos out of the Dreamweaver CS5 101. Again, we talk a lot about the fundamental aspects of CSS there. So I want to move things along here. This, to me, still falls into the category of CSS fundamentals, and that is, as you can see here, the anatomy of a CSS rule. Now, before we really dig into this, I got to reiterate something here just to make sure, again, that we're all starting from the same point here. The term CSS rule, or the phrase CSS rule, is interchangeable with the phrase CSS style. So styles and rules are the same thing, right? Sometimes you see Dreamweaver referring to rules. Sometimes you see Dreamweaver referring to styles. It's the same thing, okay? Sometimes even I interchange the two as I'm talking along here. So they're the same thing, right? Okay, so we want to dissect a CSS rule, a fairly simple CSS rule here. So if you've messed around a little bit with CSS for even just a short period of time, you've probably seen something like this with the squiggly brackets and colons and semicolons and all this kind of stuff, right? Okay, so let's sort of chop this guy apart and talk about the different components of a typical CSS rule. Now, the first aspect or the first component that we have is what's referred to as the selector. And this guy's always at the very beginning before the squiggly brackets, right? And it could be a single character like P that I have here, or it could be H1, or it could be table, or it might be something that's preceded by a period like dot emphasis or dot sidebar or who knows, dot copyright. And you might even see a selector that begins with a number sign or a hash mark. So it could be number sign header or number sign menu or something like this, right? There's a variety of different CSS selectors that are available. There's a handful of them depending on what you want to do. And of course, we'll be talking about these guys as we go along. But anyway, that's the first component of the CSS rule. And then the next component is what's referred to as the declaration. And that's pretty much everything else. Everything other than the selector is referred to as the declaration. And what the declaration is, imagine almost like, well, like the definition of a declaration, telling it what to do, right? So what we're saying here is we want all paragraphs, all Ps, to be Verdana, to use the font Verdana, right? So that's what we're declaring, right? Now, within the declaration always appears within the squiggly brackets, and notice that the squiggly brackets are at the starting and ending points of the declaration. Within the declaration, we have two components. We have the property, so in our example, font-family, or it could be border, or it could be background, or it could be margin, or padding, or whatever, all stuff that we're going to dig into. And then we're going to have that property's value. So for example, if it's a background color, then we would want to say what background color we want to use, right? You can't just say, hey, all paragraphs use a background color. You have to tell all paragraphs what background color to actually use. So there has to be some kind of a value, right? So the declaration contains the property and the value. I hope that makes sense. Now, a declaration can contain more than one property and value. As a matter of fact, some of my styles that I get working with, some of the rules that I build for myself, contain just one property and one value. Others might contain 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 properties and values. It all depends on what it is I'm trying to pull off, right? So don't feel that you have to throw everything into your CSS rules. Some CSS rules are very simple. Others are a little bit more complicated, right? So for example here's the quick example that I have here. We have font-family, so we want all paragraphs, all Ps, to be Verdana. We've also specified in our declaration, or how about this? We've declared in our declaration, if that works for you, that we want to use 9 pixels for our font size. And we also want to have a border which is going to be 1 pixel in thickness. The style is going to be solid, and the color is going to be black, okay? Now, a few things that I want to bounce off of here. Notice still that the declaration is enclosed in the squiggly brackets. So now the squiggly bracket is moved down to the very end of the CSS rule. So that's where the squiggly brackets are going to appear. So the declaration is wrapped, if you will, in these squiggly brackets. That's how it works. And also note that each property and value ends with a semicolon. So we have Verdana semicolon. Then we have the font-size, full colon space, 9px or 9 pixels, semicolon. And then we have the border property and the border value followed by a semicolon. So each value has to be ended, if you will, or followed by a semicolon. That's how it works. Okay, great. Good stuff. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention, I hope all this is making sense, by the way. The last thing that I wanted to mention is the very last property and value that I've specified here, the border. What I did here, just for fun, just to sort of bounce something off you here, is we also have something called CSS shorthand. I don't know if you've heard of this before, or maybe this is the first time you've stumbled upon it, but what I've said here is that I want to put a border all the way around all 4 sides of my paragraph, right? Now, if I wasn't using CSS shorthand, this might take up maybe another 4 or 5 lines of code to declare all of this. I'd have to do border-top, border-bottom, border-left, border-right. What I can do is I can build all of that into one property and one value, right? So instead of having lines and lines and lines of code, I can use CSS shorthand to cram it all down into just one line of code. So in other words, instead of going border-style, I can just say solid, or border-color, I can just throw the color in there, right? All inside one line. And maybe as we go along, maybe I'll bounce some CSS shorthand off of you. I wouldn't get too caught up in learning CSS shorthand at this point if you're brand new to CSS, but it's something to be aware of. And as you learn more and more about CSS, it's something that you'll definitely want to pick up on, because it's going to save you loads of time, loads of typing, and loads of lines of code inside your code. So anyway, there you go. There is the anatomy of a CSS rule.